recap of some of the things we talked about last week. So with respect to Ghazwat al-Ahzab, so you have the Qurayshis and a bunch of additional tribes and groups in Mecca. Now they team up with some of these Jewish tribes that were expelled out of Medina. So they come together. That's why Ahzab is plural for Hizbun, which means like a group or a faction, if you want to call it that. Ahzab is the plural. The reason why this is called Ghazwat al-Ahzab, because the Quraysh and the opposition, their army was comprised of various groups and tribes that all said, you know what, let's team up together. What was the goal of the Meccans with the Prophet ﷺ? What was the point of having this battle? What were they trying to achieve? What was the goal? They were going to eliminate. Everybody with me? Okay. Let's try it again. Welcome. The goal behind this battle was to extinguish Islam, to stop the Prophet ﷺ and his message, right? Why was this such a problem? It wasn't just to avenge their loss of Badr, but it was also to stop his message. Why? Because the momentum, the call was effective, the ummah continued to grow, and you didn't have just mature, wise men and women coming into the ummah now. You have the elderly, you have young children, you have families, you have uncles, you have generations of people now that are all, the message of Islam is beginning to resonate with all of them. So it's not just expanding in one way, it's expanding all throughout Medina and the world. This had to stop. So that's what Ghazwat al-Ahzab was all about. They came together and said, let's just team up, 10,000 plus, march to Medina. And obviously, as you see at the diagram in front of you there, things happened the way that they happened. They were not able to do much. And that's pretty much in a nutshell what ends up happening. Anything else? Okay. Let's get right into it. So we've already begun. Okay, so we did talk about this as well. This is one of the main subjects in the surah, the marriage between Zayd and Zainab, and how that happened, and then eventually the marriage broke apart. And we will talk more about this in today's lesson, inshallah. Okay? We discussed this first ayah. There's only one prophet that is always referred to by his title, which is, of course, who? The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why only him? Because it was the Qur'an's way of showing honor, leadership, and also to for all of the other prophets to recognize the significance of this man, that he was Khatamul Anbiya. He is the final seal for all prophets and messengers. So when Allah raises the status of an individual, we don't ask Allah why you did that. Once Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does it, we immediately follow through, and we also respect and follow the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. We're going to talk a lot about that today as well. So first ayah we talked about that the Prophet ﷺ is ordered, don't fall into, the rumors and the things, the awful things that the munafiqun and the disbelievers were spreading about you, which is that it all referred back to the marriage of Zayd and Zainab, and that how eventually the Prophet ﷺ, after they got divorced, he ended up marrying Zainab, and we'll talk about why and how all of that happened today. The next ayah, okay, it was pretty straightforward. Nothing I want to highlight there. Okay, this is the verse that we paused at, okay? مَا جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لِرَجُلٍ مِّن قَلْبَيْنِ فِي جَوْفِهِ. Allah does not place two hearts in any person's chest. The first thing that you want to note with this ayah is who Allah had singled out. رَجُلٍ, which literally means men. So there's two ways to understand this. Arabic does this all the time. It'll use a masculine title or name, but either it is referring to both men and women, or it's referring just to the men. And if it's referring only exclusive to women, then it'll use pronouns that are exclusive just to women. Let me give you an example. When we say assalamu alaikum, we don't say assalamu alaikum and reference or specify whether it is brothers or sisters we're talking to. We use this in a generic way. Because kum, kaf, mim at the end, that plural extension is used for both men and women. It is technically okay that if we were in a classroom with just sisters, that I could walk in and say, Assalamu alaykunna wa rahmatullahi wa barakat. Kunna is the extension that is used for just women alone. But the point here is, the only thing I want you to take from this is despite its using or its making a reference to what looked like to only men or only males, that is not the intent here. Rajulin is also referring to persons, both male and female, but especially the men. So when you write your notes with respect to this ayah, it's referring to both, but especially there's an emphasis on the men that they were not given two hearts in their chest. Now, what is this talking about? What is the point of this ayah? So, the first thing is that there had been a custom, a culture amongst the people of Mecca and Medina pre-Islam, that if somebody was really intelligent and smart, they would go around and tell people that, I've been blessed with this amazing memory. I can do so much that I have two hearts in me. I have a heart for my feelings and emotions, and then I have a heart for my intelligence and my knowledge. This was a phrase or a culture that was very prevalent at that time. So when you see two hearts, take it in the literal sense. They literally believed that those who did not have any faith, were not grounded in terms of common sense, they literally believed that somehow they were designed and created with two hearts in them. That's why they were able to excel above and beyond others. So obviously this didn't make any sense, and you'll see why. We'll come back to this ayah, but let's just break it down piece by piece. So the first meaning that I mentioned to you is in the literal sense, okay? The second meaning is this. It's referring as a message to the Prophet ﷺ to share with everyone in Medina that a person, a husband in particular, or a man specifically, cannot put his love or pull his love in both hate and appreciation, or hate and love at the same time. It's going to be one or the other. I can't just love you and hate you both at the same time. Do you understand? So this is the second interpretation, and it's referring to specifically with marriage, of course. So sometimes, he might be pulled, or society or culture or friends or the surrounding may push him to dislike a certain thing. He can pretend and say, I hate it, but really deep down, he doesn't hate it. He appreciates it and he loves it. And then it brings us also to the whole discussion of marriage. This works for both husbands and wives. You can't love one day and hate the other day and then love one day. It's got to be either or. Because if you live a life where your hate and love is constantly fluctuating, marriages don't last like that. That is a recipe for the marriage to be ruined. There has to be consistency. You might get annoyed at things. Things might upset you, but what do we do, those of us that are married? What do you do when something upsets you in a marriage? Do you just forget about it and be like, okay, don't worry, let's go to bed, and when we wake up, it's all gone, and I love you again? What we're taught in the Sharia is that you should discuss and address and solve those issues. Whether solving them, the response or the answer to that is that, okay, let's forget about it, or this is what we need to do to avoid this. The point is, you're constantly moving away from hate and problems and animosity in a marriage towards maintaining and preserving consistency in love and appreciation. So this ayah is also in reference to marriages in general, that especially the husbands cannot pull their love in two different directions, their love and hate in both directions at the same time. He's only got one heart. There's only one heart that he can use, and that's where his emotions and feelings come from. Why are men alone mentioned here? So the word that's used, take a look at this. ما جعل الله لرجل من قلبين في جوفه. See this word here? Jawf literally means this, the torso. So behind the chest cavity down to the stomach, it's all hollow right here. Down to the stomach area, behind your heart, it's hollow. So that's where Allah, when Allah says fi jawfi, meaning there isn't another secret heart stuck, buried in there somewhere. There's only this one heart. You might think when you read this ayah that, and I've had students who have asked me about this over the years, that the ayah just seems so obvious, like two hearts. Who would ever think or imagine such a thing? Let me remind you that pre-Islam, people were involved in doing and believing anything and everything. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu once said, when you practice the religion, then you truly understand what people were up to, what they were involved in pre-Islam. So the more you learn about this deen, the more you start to understand, man, what people were doing prior to this was just out of this world. No common sense, no understanding. They just literally went with whatever their whims and desires felt like. So if you felt like saying that, you know, I have two emotions or two hearts in my body, and started to propagate that to society and to family and so on, people believed it. Let me ask you all, do we have this problem today where somebody can stand up and make an absurd claim that makes absolutely no sense and gain attraction, gain followings, gain people that are like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense? Absolutely. We have that all the time, all day, every day. So I tell people all the time, it doesn't matter what you believe in. You can literally make up your own language, your own religion, your own prayer. It doesn't matter how absurd it is. We live in a time where you'll develop a following. You'll have a jama'ah. You know, I once met somebody in another country who was so adamant, and he was so convinced. I don't know what was wrong with him, but he was so convinced that there were 6 prayers in a day, not 5. And he would preach this message, and he would like write about it, and he would preach it exclusively to his community. 6 salawat. What was the 6th prayer? Salatul Witr. Because the Prophet ﷺ never missed witr. While he was traveling, he's praying witr. When he's at home, he's praying witr. So he just took that as, it's got to be 6. Until he made it official that he was going to have his own musalla and prayer hall in his house. And he gained a following. There was a jama'ah that would congregate in the basement of his house every single day, praying the 6th prayer, as he would call it. So it's not a far-fetched idea to just come up with things that make no sense and propagate that message and gain support, okay? So you can't love and hate at the same time, which we talked about. Many of the Quraysh fabricated rumors that they had 2 hearts to claim superiority over the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So listen to one example of this. There, after the Battle of Badr, there was a man by the name of Abu Ma'mar, who was part of the Qurayshi, okay? Abu Ma'mar. His story is really famous because of this one incident. When the mushrikun were defeated in Badr, he got on his horse and he started to like walk and start leaving Mecca slowly. But he was devastated. His head was down, he was upset, he was lost, he was in a state of shock. Here's the thing. He had one of his shoe in one hand and the other shoe was still on his foot. So one foot, whether it be the left or right, has no shoe on because he's holding it in his hand. And he's on his horse and he's moving like this. Abu Sufyan sees this man and he stops him and he says, what happened to everybody? So he says, we lost, we were defeated. So then Abu Sufyan asks him, he's like, why are you holding one shoe in your hand and the other one is on your foot? And that's when Abu Ma'mar snapped out of it and he said, It was only then that I realized all this time I had one shoe in my hand and the other one was on my foot. And had I had two hearts, I would have known this. So now he understood he doesn't have two hearts in him, or else one heart would have been focused on one thing and the other heart would have been focused on the other. So he understood this lesson. Why Abu Ma'mar? He was known to do one thing. He kept on going around Mecca, telling everybody that he was blessed with a memory that was so powerful and so strong, it was far more superior than the memory of the Prophet ﷺ. And so therefore, he is far more superior in intelligence and knowledge than the Prophet ﷺ. So all of that was demolished and extinguished because of this one incident. You know what the scholars said about this? It wasn't done, this didn't happen by accident. Him carrying one shoe in one hand and the other one on his foot. That wasn't by accident. It was all a carefully planned out scenario from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Here's the thing that when I remember this example, what I think about. Out of the millions upon millions of examples you could come up with to show and somebody that, look, you don't have two hearts in your body. Allah used not his foot, but the thing that wraps around his foot. So something that is considered to be one of the dirtiest things you put on your body, right, is your shoe, because it walks everywhere. It picks up anything and everything. So the most useless and dirtiest thing that you have on your body is the thing that Allah uses to demonstrate your stupidity in thinking you have two hearts and walking around telling everybody you're better than the Prophet. This is what some ulama called, it's kind of like an internal embarrassment or humiliation. Your slipper or your shoe had to put you in place. You understand? So this is always like a big deal with the Qurayshi them at that time, and perhaps maybe till this day to some extent. Right? It's not about what's right and wrong. For a lot of cultures, it's about how you say it and what the scenario was. As long as, it's perfect, it's right, my status is still maintained, I'm not embarrassed, I'm not humiliated, I'll listen to what you have to say. Otherwise, it's thrown out the window. So Allah used something that was so minuscule and so trivial to give him the greatest lesson, to keep him quiet. Ibn Abbas said that the Munafiqun said that the Prophet ﷺ also had two hearts. That's why his rules of Islam keep changing. One of the things that we talked about was Surah Al-Ahzab, the way that we see it today in 73 ayat. Was it always like that? Those of us who were here last week, did Surah Al-Ahzab always have 73 ayat? No. At first, when it was revealed, remember we mentioned Abu Bakr and many of the other companions said, when the Prophet ﷺ first received Surah Al-Ahzab, they said that it was equal to or even longer than Surah Al-Baqarah. Surah Al-Baqarah has 280 plus ayat. It's the longest surah of the Qur'an. When it first came down, and the Prophet ﷺ is teaching this surah to his companions, it was equal to or longer than the longest surah. And as time went on, gradually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala removed some of these ayat and basically condensed it to what we see today, 73 ayat. In Arabic, we call this nasikh and mansukh. Like some ayat have been replaced or abrogated, and whatever is mentioned in one surah, now there's a new ruling that came down and it's found in another surah. The Qur'an does this all the time. So it would keep ayat that present an old ruling on an issue, but then that ruling now is changed, and here's the new ruling now, and it's mentioned in context in another surah. The question that people always ask, students always ask when they hear that is, what's the point of leaving the old verses then? Why are they still in the Qur'an? Why not just remove them altogether? What is your response to that? What do you think? We have lots of verses like that. What do you think? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Why leave verses that we, in essence, we can't even practice them? They're just there. What do you think?
It demonstrates the evolution of the
Okay.
itself.
Show you how the Quran itself evolves. Do you also learn, are you able to appreciate the present day context of things by understanding what it used to be in the past? So Ramadan, everybody understand what fasting used to be like before Ramadan? It was impossible. If you fell asleep within the hours during the day of fast, if you fell asleep, your whole fast was nullified. If you fell asleep during the iftar, not only is it nullified, but you have to make up the entire day as well. Then there were a whole bunch of other things that would break the fast. And if you nullified your fast, this is what I thought was impossible. I couldn't imagine us practicing this today. There was a third phase that fasting went through before it was abrogated and changed to what we know today. If you fell asleep during the iftar time, you fell asleep, you would have to remain fasting until the following day's iftar before you can break. So you're basically fasting 2 days straight before you can have, and you've got to force yourself. Hopefully you don't collapse because you're malnourished and you're starving, that you have to stay awake until the following day when sunset happens, and then you can have something to eat. And you were not allowed to sleep after you had iftar. You had to stay awake until the fajr time, have suhoor, and then continue. Then you can go and take a rest after that. Really bizarre. All of that's been abrogated. So you see, we have this history, and Allah does this, and one of the most common reasons why is that when you understand where you came from, what life used to be like, then you can appreciate the ease that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us today. Do Muslims still complain about fasting today? That it's 17 hours, 16? Do Muslims still do that? Oh, absolutely. And you know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in return for those who do that? يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ. In the verses that talk about everything with Ramadan, Allah says, I only wanted things to be easy for you, and I didn't want things to be difficult for you. So that's why fasting in Ramadan is so easy, but try fasting outside of Ramadan just one day. It's almost impossible, right? Okay, let's continue here. After Badr, a man amongst the mushrikun. So this is the example that I shared with you. And you see, this was the man, Abu Ma'mar is his name, but his name is not really important. But he goes, I never realized that one was missing. And when he responds, if he had two hearts, he would have known the lesson was complete and he understood his situation. So meaning, you can never have two belief systems. So here's the third meaning of that Allah has not given you two hearts. This is the most common explanation of this ayah, is what's in bold letters here. You can never have two belief systems with Allah. You either completely submit or you don't. You see, this is a principle in Aqidah and even Usul al-Fiqh as well. You have to be 100% in or you're not. So this creates a lot of problems for the Muslims who sort of practice some things and not others. So let's go back to the Salah example because it's one of the most common ones, right? Do all Muslims pray? No. Not all Muslims pray. Do all Muslims know that they should pray? Yeah. Most Muslims, if not all of them, know that they are obligated to do some form of prayer every single day, consistently. Why is it, or does anybody know what one of the reasons Qur'an tells us why someone wouldn't pray? It gives us many, but one reason that you know of why someone who knows they should pray and chooses not to, or they're just really lazy about it. فَلَا صَدَّقَ وَلَا صَلَّى وَلَكِنْ كَذَّبَ وَتَوَلَّى. This is in reference to somebody. The first problem, if somebody is struggling to just pray and do that consistently, their heart is not fully convinced that Islam is the ultimate truth. That's really scary. فَلَا صَدَّقَ. So they didn't believe, fully and completely believe in this truth of Islam. And as a result, listen to the ayah. فَلَا صَدَّقَ. Immediately after, وَلَا صَلَّى. And they didn't pray. So that came immediately after. They could not recognize that this way of life was the ultimate truth. And the first place in their belief, they saw the results of that was in their prayer. It's either they stopped praying or they prayed sometimes, or they prayed but not really, right? They prayed but not really. So this is the most common tafsir that you will find with respect to this, that the two hearts is referring more towards your belief, or what we say in Arabic, your aqidah with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you cannot be somewhat in. Allah tells us in another surah, udkhulu fi silmi kaffa. So enter this path completely, wholeheartedly, kaffa, without any regrets, without turning back at all. I would even add that that is a lifelong journey. You have to work at keeping yourself completely 100% devoted into Islam. You have to keep working at that every single day for your entire life. And that is one of the wisdoms why we pray 5 times a day. One of the wisdoms why we do that is to reinforce our belief system in Allah. Because every single day, the moment you miss a prayer, and I'm sure all of us, including myself, we've all experienced this at some point. You know, when when you missed a salah, you're stuck in traffic or something and you couldn't pull over and pray, and you're looking at the time like, oh my God, Maghrib is going now, and I still couldn't get, and you start getting anxious. And you can't sit and you can't concentrate on nothing until that prayer is done. That is one great sure sign that you believe in this, as Islam is the truth. You're on the right path, bi'idhnillah, right? So today this is not as simple. This ayah exposes the hypocrites and their hypocrisy. So in context in Medina, this ayah helps to sort of make that known and prevalent. The heart harbors feelings, memories, beliefs no other part of the human can harbor. This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created it. What do you guys think about that statement? The heart is home to feelings, memories, emotions, beliefs. Nothing else in our body can do that except the heart. Yeah. Let me ask you a question. Why is the heart referred to as qalb? Why is it called qalb? Does anybody know? So remember this, okay? The word qalbun comes from the verb qaf lam ba, qalaba. Qalaba means something, look at my hand, it goes like this. It's constantly moving back and forth and it won't stop. You stop it, it's dead. That's in qalaba or qalaba. It's constantly moving back and forth. So it's in reference to the heart is constantly beating, right? So it's given this name because it's constantly beating. Okay. Another name for the heart in Qur'an is fu'ad. Fu'ad. And fu'ad is really in reference to your feelings, your emotions, your belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is why you'll probably hear some Muslims will say, yeah, I have problems practicing the religion, but I love Islam and I love Allah. What they're saying to you is what's called fu'ad. So that's the part of the heart that is focused just on feelings and emotions, whether they're good feelings or not. Right? And we don't have to talk about love because everybody today will always reference to the heart and associate the heart with love. Like I love, and they will always do this naturally, and that is in the fitrah of how Allah created us. We know common sense that it's in our heart, our intentions and our feelings. Okay. So we already talked about this, that it can also reference feelings between a husband and wife. Nor does he regard your wives as unlawful for you like your real mothers, even if you say there are. So this is let me go back to the ayah. وَمَا جَعَلَ أَزْوَاجَكُمُ اللَّائِي تَظَاهِرُونَ مِنْهُنَّ أُمَّهَاتِكُمْ. Nor does he regard your wives as unlawful for you, like your real mothers. Does anybody know what this is about? even if you say they are. This is in reference to a really shameful practice that people used to do before Islam, but even in the early days of Islam. When a husband wanted to divorce his wife, he would say, "You are like my mother's back." In other words, my mother, I can't marry her. So she turns her back and walks away from me. So you now are like my mother's back. In other words, I can't be married to you anymore. And that's how they used to divorce before these laws were sent down. And although that phrase is no longer used, the Prophet ﷺ came and abolished the actual statement itself. You're not allowed to say anything remotely close or similar to that phrase. It's wrong, it's shameful, it's bad etiquette, it's just an awful thing to say. So what scholars did is they said that even if you don't use the same set of words, but you still divorce and say awful, mean, hurtful things to her, it's the same ruling in the sight of Allah. It will still count, but potentially punishable on him for doing that. Do you all know that when a divorce happens, that the sunnah is to get her a gift, a goodbye gift? Now, can you imagine doing that today? Listen, before I see you in court, I just want you to have this gift, okay? My lawyer will get in contact with you. Like, just imagine how, because this comes from Surah Al-Baqarah. So just remember, Surah Al-Baqarah started the conversation of, started the rulings of divorce, and Surah Talaq completed it. So half of the rulings of divorce is in Surah Al-Baqarah, and the rest of it, the waiting period and all of that, is found in Surah Talaq itself. So Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah tells us, وَتَفْرِيقٌ بِالْإِحْسَانِ, like you separate from each other, but you've got to do it in a polite and religious and righteous way. It cannot be done out of hate and animosity and all of these things. And I know me saying that, it sounds really foreign in this day and age, but it just goes to show one of the many things of the reality of Islam as opposed to what happens in the world today. So this particular phrase is, so make sure you note this. This word تظاهرون, it comes from a word ظهار. Look, it's right here at the bottom. ظهر. This is a phrase that is used in war. It's also the name of the statement that a husband used to say to his wife. You are like my mother's back, right? So that statement is called ظهار. So ظهار is a term that is used now more commonly in war. And it's in reference to how you want to respond and what sort of impression or image or action you're going to show to the opposition. You had something? Yeah?
Yeah, I wanted to ask questions. If the husband called his wife mother,
Yeah.
or the wife called her husband dad, is it?
No. No, when we're going to do a whole section on names in a moment, but no. So if you just by chance or by habit, sort of nicknames you kind of throw back at each other, mom, dad, husband, call each other, those terms, that's absolutely fine. Because this here requires, for it to mean anything, it requires a very, very clear intention behind it, right? And by the way, if anything like this, if you ever hear of somebody doing this, saying this statement to their wife, does the divorce count or not? That's the billion-dollar question. The ulama, they split on this issue, whether it counts or not. And the vast majority is that it does count, even if you're just joking about it. Right? The Prophet ﷺ told us that even if you're joking about divorce, it will still count. So if a husband and wife just sitting watching TV, like, oh, imagine I divorced you, like, you know, that couple on TV. Like if I just said, hey, I divorce you. You may be very careful with statements like that. Those are things you can't throw around even jokingly. Prophet ﷺ says, even if you joke about it, it counts. So be very cautious about those kind of things. Because again, the society we live in today doesn't really take those things very serious. Nor does he regard your adopted children as your real children. Okay. Just make sure we, I said Allah for you, like even if though you say are, okay. Nor does he regard. So this is the next part of the ayah. Let me just show you the Arabic. وَمَا جَعَلَ oops. What am I doing here? There we go. وَمَا جَعَلَ أَدْعِيَاءَكُمْ أَبْنَاءَكُمْ. Right here. Even, nor does he regard your adopted children as your real children. So, going back to the Prophet ﷺ, Zayd is living with him. Who did we say Zayd was? An adopted son, okay? So Zayd is an adopted son. You tell me, without even looking at this ayah, is it safe to assume the Prophet ﷺ would treat Zayd like his own son? Without knowing anything about Zayd, but you know everything about the Prophet, it's safe to assume he would do that? Yeah, absolutely. So the Prophet ﷺ used to treat and call Zayd like his own son. This was allowed before this ayah was sent, is that you were allowed to use these phrases and you were allowed to live with your adopted child and treat them like they were your actual child. There's a difference between caring for them as your actual child and interacting and treating and living and growing together as your actual child. This ayah is in reference to you adopting a child and treating and telling and ingraining into their minds and into their hearts, forget about your real parents. I'm your mother. I'm your father. That's not allowed in Islam, even till this day. Like, it's a very clear and explicit ruling. If you ever adopt a child, you can never, ever, you're never allowed to give the impression that this child is 100% yours. You'll be responsible and you are required to nurture them and care for them and provide just like your own children. But once this child reaches a stage in their life where they start asking questions, and even if they don't, you as the parent are required to have this conversation with them at some point. You've seen those shows. Now they make like TV shows about this stuff where, you know, the child grows up and like, I just realized I saw my birth certificate and it's not even my mom's name is on it. Somebody else. I need to go find him and create a whole big scene. You know, everybody's crying at the end, you know, I'm your real mom and so on. So Islam takes care of that from the very beginning, the first moment that's possible once the child is mature. And it should be also, we should all understand it's obvious. Because at the end of the day, no matter what you provide for this individual, birthright is priority in the sight of Allah. Okay? Giving birth to this child cannot just be thrown out the window because that person couldn't take care of this child. That will be a separate issue that's dealt with on its own. So this ayah came down to remind the Prophet ﷺ to no longer make this reference. And then also, one last thing, the Meccans and as well as in Medina, this was the culture then, that if you had an adopted child, you always referred to this child as your own. So that had to stop, and this was what they would follow. Next problem. Here's the problem with this. When the munafiqun heard, so as time went on, remember we mentioned that Zayd and Zainab, their marriage broke, right? They separated. And Zainab was devastated by this. So later, some time passes by, and the Prophet ﷺ marries her. When the munafiqun saw that, we have a lot of this in our own communities these days, right? We have a lot of this. When the munafiqun saw that, what was the rumor that they spread all across Medina? Muhammad married his... Sorry, he married his... Well, they would say he married his son's wife. Like this, that's how they would phrase it. And the rumor went everywhere. That's the first ayah. That's what it was about. اتق الله ولا تطع الكافرين والمنافقين. So just have taqwa of Allah and don't follow or listen to what the munafiqun and the disbelievers. Quick question, do you notice that munafiq and disbelievers are always linked together? Because they're, in the sense, they're both one and one. Because a munafiq is someone who is on the outside one thing and the opposite inside, right? It's almost like a disbeliever. Because kafir or kufr is you bury the true belief in you and you live life on something else. The definition is very similar to the two, between them. So constantly these two terms are coined together in various ayat. So Munafiqun started spreading all of this all throughout Medina, and it became a huge problem. Why? Why did this become a problem? Why can't just people be like, oh, it's just a rumor, it's not true, and just get on with life? It's against the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, anything else?
He's an example for the...
Yeah, it's just because of who he is. You know when your leader is insulted and their reputation is attacked, it doesn't hurt just the leader. It also, there's aspects of that pain that trickles down to the followers. Because they now stand and they wait to see how strong is the leader, what is he going to do next? And although rumors had happened with him all the time, the Prophet ﷺ always was deeply, deeply saddened when people talked about him and they were wrong. When people spread these kinds of rumors about him or regarding his family. Surah An-Nur, those of you that study with me, the first page was about what? It was the rumor against his wife Aisha, radiyallahu anha. So even though that we're taught, try not to take these things personally, they still hurt. And nobody can, exempt themselves from feeling that pain. And this is a man who is trying his best to be rahmatul lil alamin, to be a mercy to all mankind. And this group now in a corner somewhere just started to take this scenario and turn it into something really awful. There were members amongst him that started questioning his leadership as a result of these rumors. Okay? And now you'll see as we continue with this story how the Prophet ﷺ handles these kinds of things. So with this ayah, you can call anybody your son, doesn't mean they are. Cultures around the world regard anyone like family, and that family is family. So these are just some of the things I put here for us to really sort of understand that it's not restricted to just one particular scenario. This is a culture that people do all the time. And if you do it just casually, you don't really mean it, it's out of kindness. I mean, I have 30, 40 mothers around the world. Right? Sheikh, you're like my son. Sheikh, you're like my son. And you just take it for what it is, right? It's somebody telling you this out of respect and kindness and so on. As long as you keep it that way, there's no issue. They are only your baseless assertions. That's the last part of the ayah here. ذَلِكُمْ قَوْلُكُمْ بِأَفْوَاهِكُمْ. So one of the ways that the Qur'an teaches us how to deal with rumors is this ayah. See what Allah says? These are just kalam, and that's just talk. They got no truth, nothing on them. So what is the Quran indirectly saying when Allah highlights? That's just talk. That's just useless, baseless talk they're saying. So what is Allah indirectly teaching the Prophet ﷺ in terms of dealing with these rumors? Just ignore. Is this part of the ayah a separate verse by itself? No. It's a small portion of a much longer verse. So what Allah is indirectly teaching us, try your best not to dwell on these rumors. Okay? People will always talk. No matter, you're the prophet of Allah, and they're still talking about you in the most awful way. So any other leader, any other president, imam, scholar, doesn't matter. What you have to do, the first thing as a person of faith is try your very best to just push it aside. Okay, that's just kalam people are going to talk about. And they'll be accountable for that. وَاللَّهُ يَقُولُ الْحَقِّ وَهُوَ يَهْدِي السَّبِيلَ. But Allah declares the truth and He alone guides to the right way. What do you think is the message here? Link this, the last part of the ayah to the subject now of these rumors being spread. link this as part of the solution. What is Allah really saying to the Prophet ﷺ with this conclusion here? Allah declares the truth. No matter what you all say about me, Allah knows the truth. Don't we do that? We say that all the time. You know, Allah is a witness, I'm not the way you describe it. That didn't happen between me and her. That didn't happen the way you're saying, the way you think. Allah knows the truth. We hear this all the time. Yeah, that's part of an ayah now of the Qur'an. وَهُوَ يَهْدِ السَّبِيلَ, and He is going to guide you on the right and most blessed path. Just talk and nothing more. Okay. But Allah declares the truth, and you know, guys, okay. أُدْعُوهُمْ لِآبَائِهِمْ هُوَ أَقْسَطُ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ. Let your adopted children keep their family names. أُدْعُوهُمْ, so leave them. لِآبَائِهِمْ. When you make reference to the children and their names, who are you referencing this to? Is it like Muhammad or Yusuf, son of, or and then the father, or do you put the mother's name? Whose name goes there? The father. Why? I mean, you're right, but let's just understand why. Why does he get to like have his name linked to my child? I gave birth to this child. Doesn't that count for something? So what is your response to that?
I think I said mother is the mother, like she's you know who the mother is, but the father you never.
Yeah, that's exactly it. You can always replace the father. All right? So understanding by name who that father is critical. You can never replace the mother. There's only one person that will birth that child. So whether you know the name of her or not, sure, her lineage to this child is 100% automatically preserved in history forever. It will never change. So this is more of, think about when you say son of and then you put the father's name, think of it this way, that it's kind of your official label or announcement to the world. This is who the father of this child is. The mother doesn't have to do that. She doesn't need to announce anything. Because no matter what they dig through this child's history, it will always come back to one mother. Okay? Asiya radiallahu anha, see, she has Musa alayhi salam, but the mother, the biological mother, is never exempted or left out in his journey from when he was a baby to prophethood. She's always part of that journey. Remember, after like a day or so, when Asiya found him, then she had to return, find the mother, and the mother had to sit there and nurse Musa alayhi salam to calm him down. He was crying for hours and hours and hours until, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did that just to calm her heart down. She was missing him. The point is, even the best and the most powerful, Asiya, the wife of the most powerful individual at the time, still had to go back and retrace the step. Where's the mother of this child? We need to go find her. Okay, without even knowing her name. So, let your adopted children keep their family names. Okay, khair. Let's see where this is going to go. That is more just in the sight of Allah. هُوَ أَقْسَطُ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ. Aqsat here is one of the most common words in the Qur'an to describe justice, fairness. But if you do not know their father's name, then they are simply your fellow believers and close associates. So you see, if you don't know what the father is, what's his name, can't find him, don't know where he is, فَإِخْوَانُكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ وَمَوَالِيكُمْ. They are like your brothers in faith. They are like your brothers in faith. That's it. So, what is the closest thing to us after our family? Who is the closest to us after our family? So after our parents, children, cousins, relatives, who comes after immediately in terms of closeness to us? All of you, all of us, our brothers and sisters in faith. You're right there, right after our family. Like that's enormous, because the Madanis didn't have this kind of relationship. Now it's become official. Umar, now we're going to talk about names. Okay, I wanted to throw this in here because I think it was important when we're talking about names and titles and things like that, that we should just sort of go into a side discussion on not just choosing names and names in general. So here's a couple of things that I want to share with you, I think is important for us, just so you get a complete picture on this subject. A side point is that we're talking a lot about adoption, but the reality is that most of us here in this part of the world don't have the experience of the adoption process, or may never even think about that in our lifetime. I'm just talking about this part of the world. It's not a common thing. So that's why you're never going to hear a khutbah about adoption. You might take a class about it or something, but it's not something as prevalent as when it comes to titles and names. So let's just try to keep on the same page in terms of what this surah teaches us about names and choosing titles. Umar radiallahu anh had the same name before he was Muslim until after he was Muslim. Salman al-Farisi, he's named after a fire worshipper pre-Islam. Until after Islam, he still kept the same name. What's your Islamic name? You need to get one. This is a phrase that a lot of people use today. So when somebody becomes a Muslim, what's the first thing we end up telling them? Oh my God, you gotta choose a Muslim name. Wow. And if they don't, and you're like, yeah, hi, my name is, I don't know, my name is Christina. My name is, I don't know, Charles. Charles, astaghfirullah. I can't call you Brother Charles. What kind of thing is that? So let's make one thing very clear. What's the ruling on having those kinds of names? If your name is Samantha, Jennifer, Charles, Bob, whatever, what's the ruling on keeping those names? It's 100% okay. There's no such thing as a blessed name. There are names that have amazing, like beautiful meanings to them. There are names the Prophet ﷺ loved. We all know one of them. What is one of the names that he loved the most? Abdullah. Yeah, Abdullah, most beloved name to the Prophet ﷺ. The hadith never says, name your child this name because I love it. He just says, this is my favorite name. That's it. And that's a good enough reason to try and use that name when you have a son, is to try to use it. That's a good enough reason. But technically, you're not more blessed and gaining more reward from Allah because your name now is Abdullah. Right? We know Abdullahs that are sitting like, have done the worst of the worst, have done the most awful things, have not lived up to that name. And the Arabs, they have a saying amongst themselves, يُعْرَفُ الشَّخْصِيَّةِ بِإِسْمِهِ. Like you understand somebody, you get an insight in somebody's personality and their qualities about them based on their name. When I read this statement, that's the first time I fell in love with my name. I used to hate my name. I wanted to change it to Mustafa. Yeah, before I went to university, I wanted to be Mustafa. I don't know if Lion King had anything to do with Mufasa or Mustafa. I was like, okay, something like that. But when I started to learn that your name really does tell something, or it's linked to something about you, and not every single name is like that, but most, especially if you choose an Arabic name, it's almost always, because every name can be linked back to a root word that's linked back to a linguistic definition, and you'll always link to something meaningful. So when I read the true meaning, I understood what Musleh meant and the difference between Musleh and Saleh, then I was like, okay, this is my name, inshallah. This is the name I want to live up to. So the first thing that I wanted to be very clear, if you ever come across any brother or sister that still carries a non-Islamic or Muslim name, that is 100% perfectly okay. There is no narration indicating the superiority of any particular name. So the default ruling, all names are permissible, okay? The only time a name becomes impermissible is when there's obvious evidence to declare that that name is wrong. And you'll see like somebody names, hopefully nobody's ever done it. Somebody names himself like Shaitan. is my brother Iblis, like some kind of, thing like that. Those are names, obviously, that are inappropriate, right? So the ruling is not allowed. So that brings me to this point. The ruling is not allowed if it's proven that they are not, right? The Prophet ﷺ changed the names of some of the companions he felt carried an inappropriate name. There's a few narrations like that. The Prophet ﷺ did not choose the names of his children. This is really important. Because of a religious reason. He didn't. So Kulthum, Fatima, all of these names was not because it was linked to something. These are just names the Prophet ﷺ loved. Okay? All names are mubah. Yep. Say it again.
Before Islam?
Say it again.
Did he not have his children before Islam?
Did he have his children before Islam?
Yeah, before he became a
No. Yeah, but this legislation definitely came after, much later in his prophethood, right? As an official ruling that, you cannot have certain names are haram and then certain names are encouraged and then certain names he loves. But despite how you categorize all of these names, at the end of the day, it never indicates to anybody at any moment. And the reason why I'm really saying this point is, it happens so often. When you tell somebody your name, so you're like, my name is Muhammad. Oh, mashallah, Muhammad. Inshallah, you're going to follow Muhammad. And they start like really putting you on the spot, not knowing that, listen, my name's Muhammad, but I never really prayed Fajr, ever. I'm still working on that, right? So it's kind of like it works both ways. On the one side, it's hard to live up to some of the meanings of these names, but at the same time, it's kind of like this naive response that some people have when they hear a particular name. Like, I'm born in Medina. Do you know just that how I have to go through? You're born in Medina? You were living right beside the grave? That's your neighbor is the Prophet ﷺ? I'm like, listen, relax, man. We were in like a poor little corner somewhere in Medina. So this kind of response and this culture that's formed around simply because of birthright or title or names, this is what we want to try and highlight. And that's what this surah eradicates. Like, it throws all of that out the window. So this is why I put them in point form notes, because each of these lessons come from the same surah. All names are mubah unless there's a particular proof indicating that it's forbidden or recommended. The meaning of the name must be acceptable religiously, linguistically, and culturally. So how? Religiously, certain names in the Sharia says it's bad. So for example, Iblis or La'na or Qarun or Fir'aun or Haman or Rama and so on. So religiously, these names become haram immediately, right? Not because of their meaning, not because of linguistic, not because of culture, none of that. All of that's out the window. The Qur'an already makes this clear, specifically names like this. When it comes to linguistic, Umar forbade the name Asiya because it literally meant this, sinner or wrongdoer. But culturally, it doesn't take on this definition. So technically, because of this, this name was considered okay and it was acceptable. But if you dug into the Arabic, let me give you another example. Everybody know what my last name is? Khan. Do you know what my name means in Arabic? When I'm sitting in a classroom at the University of Medina, the professor calls out name, Musleh Khan. Hey, and he's like, looking, where's Musleh Khan? And he looks at, A'udhu billahi minash shaitan. Khan? Because Khan literally means the one who deceives. A con man. That's what Khan means in Arabic. So here I am carrying Musleh, and attached to this now is Khan. So when they hear numerous, endless amount of times, I have to explain where this name came from, and it means something completely different in Urdu, right? Which is Khan, where the name originally comes from, right? So yeah, so they always like, why you have this name Khan? I even had one professor really like drilled it in my head to change my last name. And he's like, you're born here in Saudi, let's go to the ministry and we can get this done legally right now. And I was like, no, It may mean one thing for you, but for us it doesn't. Like the culture is, this is a very famous name. So this is really like relevant and important to keep in mind when it comes to culturally that some names in English are fine, but in Arabic, they're not recommended. So somebody's name is Christian, right? So in English, that's perfectly okay. But now when you're dealing with other Muslims, it's kind of like a scenario that you don't want to be in each and every time having to explain yourself. So this is where scholars say that if you can or want to, you should try to get a better name than this. Same thing with Ramadan. In English, Ramadan, everybody knows the month of fasting. They can make reference to something great. But in Islam, these are names that are highly disliked to use. Yeah, to call some Ramadan, even names like Iman or Jannah. These are names that are not haram, but they're discouraged. Because then you'll be like, oh my God, Iman, she's the worst ever. So you see the phrase? Scholars pay attention very meticulously to these kind of sentences and words that you use day after day. So when you have a beautiful word placed in a sentence that means something awful, it's just like to get away from all of that and just to keep the name always into something pleasant and something blessed, like with a good meaning behind it. So once again, don't think that these names are haram or wrong. Therefore, we have to make sure we know what the name means before we choose it. It is disliked to give a name that is self-praising. What's an example of that? What's the example of a name that as soon as you hear it, it's like it almost kind of puts you in well, maybe you're not for the person who carries the name, but to others, like, oh, your name is that? What's an example of that? Yeah, Azim, or my name is MashaAllah. Yeah, so that would be strictly haram, right? So
In our culture, that's a very popular name, Allah. It's A-L-A-A.
Oh, Allah. Yes, that's a different. It sounded like you were saying Allah. So yeah, no, Allah is perfectly fine.
Jannah is a very popular name
Yeah.
in our culture.
Jannah is a very popular. I know some people who carry that name. Like I said, it's not haram, but it's just those are the kinds of names that are just discouraged. Try to get a different. But if you do, don't have to go change your birth certificate. You don't have to do none of that. Inshallah khair. Leave it as is. Yeah. Yeah. Because the culture shifted where nobody thinks of Asiya that way. I can, for sure, most of you have heard Asiya taking on that meaning for the first time, right? That's why the culture is paid attention to in Islam. It's a big deal. Let me throw another example to you that has nothing to do with this. Everybody knows what henna is? You know the henna? Eid Day, all the sisters know what henna is, right? So you got all those nice design, whatever, right? Do you know that prior to henna being part of Islamic culture, for about 5,000 years, the Hindus would use henna as part of their devotion to worshiping the sun? So if you wore henna, it immediately would let everyone know who that true entity or deity that you worship was the sun. That was your God. Nobody thinks about worshiping the sun when they put on henna these days. Why? Because as time, I can see the shockness in some of your videos. I have a whole bag of fresh henna at home. It's completely fine. You see, the culture shifted all of that. And then on top of that, the Prophet ﷺ himself used henna. Companions used henna. So you see, when you look back and you start digging deep, you'll be surprised a lot of things that are perfectly normal now, what they first began and what their history is. So Asiya and henna and all these other things, don't be surprised. But rest assured that inshallah, because of how people understand these names today, that they're perfectly okay. It has an indication in it that makes a person special and higher than others. It is not haram, but not recommended. Jabir ibn Abdullah reported that the Prophet ﷺ decided to forbid names like Ya'la, Baraka, Aflah, Yasar, and Nafi' because of these names. Now, this hadith, these names here, when we say forbid, he did not make it haram. This hadith, when we say forbid, scholars explain it did not mean that it was haram, but it was highly, highly discouraged. Okay, it was discouraged because why? You got to understand, Arabs and Ahlul Lugha, the people of the Arabic language, this is how they get to know and understand you, is by your name and where you're from. That's why when you meet Arabs for the first time, they'll ask you, oh, what's your name? Musleh, min ayna, and where are you from? And then you'll say, I'm from Canada, but I was born in Saudi. No. What is your origin? So I have to go back 300 years and you're like, I don't know, I think my great-great-grandfather was from India somewhere. I don't know. I was like, oh, so you're Indian. And that's how they do it. Yeah, it's very common. So that's why you see names like this. That's why you see hadith like this. It's because it goes back to how the culture perceives these titles and names, okay? When is naming a child necessary? So let's just go through a couple of these questions and move on. When is naming a child necessary? So let's go back right from the beginning. Child is born. When should you give that child a name? In Islam, how many days are you? 7. Does that mean that if you don't name the child before the 7th day, you've done something wrong, sinful? So why the 7th day? The Prophet ﷺ encouraged it. And if you do it, so what if you have a name already, even before the child was born? You've already made up your mind on a name. Is that okay? Yeah, 100%. However, if you choose to delay making that name official and wait until the 7th day, that is certainly more beloved to Allah because you're trying to do something just like the Prophet ﷺ, and that is always blessed. You're always being rewarded for that. So even if you have a name already, but you just intentionally wait to make it official on the 7th day, that is perfectly okay. Can a name be changed later? So some time goes by, even now. Can you just change your name? So let's just say I didn't like Musleh and my heart is stuck on Mustafa. So can I go ahead and just change it for absolutely no reason? Yeah, you can do that. Yeah, I mean, you're going to have to deal with all the logistics, but check this out. Only the first name. Last name you don't touch. Bil ijma', I cannot find one opinion that allows for anybody, marriage, no marriage, unless you have a real good, solid reason why the last name needs to be changed, right? So there has to be something very serious. A long time ago, I'd watched like these documentaries of the Holocaust, and how, when Germany and Poland and all of that, when Nazis came in and took all the Jews away and brought them out of their homes, this was actually something that a lot of them did just so that they would not be targeted and imprisoned or sent to concentration camps, is that they would try their best to change both the first and last name, right? Because they all have, yeah. So there you go, right? So that is definitely a good reason to want to go through the legal system and change your entire name completely. But only the first name in the Sharia that allows you to do that. There's a culture as well. When you get married, you always take whose name? What's the ruling on that? So she takes her husband's last name. Yeah. That is not allowed Islamically. Like, that is completely haram to do that. But, however, what's done, it's done, I have to say it to you just because, it's my responsibility to do that, but there is absolutely no reason, culturally or not, to do that. So moving forward, try and make sure that, when you have children that are going to get married, for them to understand that as well, okay? But yeah, you're absolutely right. You mentioned it's a cultural thing. That's all it is and ever was. Okay? There's no ayah or hadith that tells you that when you get married, you got to change your name. There is no blame on you for what you do by mistake. So here we are talking about these titles and name. This is the next part of the verse. There's no blame on you. So Allah says here, وَلَيْسَ عَلَيْكُمْ جُنَاحٌ فِيمَا أَخْطَأْتُمْ بِهِ وَلَكِنْ مَا تَعَمَّدَتْ قُلُوبُكُمْ وَكَانَ اللَّهُ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا. So there is no blame on you for what you do by mistake, but only for what you do intentionally. You see the word intentionally? Intention in Arabic is what? My niyyah, right? Niyyah. That's not what's mentioned in the ayah. What's mentioned in the ayah is hearts. وَلَكِنْ تَعَمَّدَتْ قُلُوبُكُمْ قَلْبٌ. See how Qur'an, how it basically knocks two birds with one stone kind of thing, right? We know the intention comes from where? From the heart. And at the same time, your emotions and your feelings all together. So your intention was to do the right thing, but it didn't happen. And so I feel awful, but my intention was right. So Allah takes care of that feeling as well. It's like, listen, don't let your heart suffer for your mistake. Your intention, fine. You had a good intention, it didn't work out that way. But don't let your heart suffer for that. Meaning, the emotions and the feelings you have also matter in the sight of Allah. Like Allah is paying attention to that because of the word qulubun, qalbun is used and it carries the meaning of both the heart and the intention as well, which I think is just very beautiful. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا. And Allah was always forgiving and exceptionally merciful. Quick question, students. You know, every time we come across things that we have studied in the past that are important, I'll just it's nothing to do with the surah, but I'll throw it out, especially for the new students that are here. When Allah is all forgiving and most merciful, you hear this ayah quite a bit. In Allah ghafurur rahim, Wallahu ghafurur rahim, wa kana Allahu ghafurur rahim. Ghafur means what? Ghafur, forgiveness. Rahim means what? Ghafur, the way that it's written, okay, if you were to scale this word, ghafur, it actually is focusing on something very specific about forgiveness. Rahim, the way that the word is structured, is focusing on something very specific when it comes to mercy. Ghafur, remember this, when Allah says He's always forgiving, Ghafur, linguistically, the breakdown of this word is telling us Allah is always and consistently willing to forgive, and He will never get tired of forgiving. You can say ghafur, you can say ghufran, you can say maghfir, you can say ghafir, you can say ghufr. There's so many forms of the same word. Ghafur means that Allah will constantly do this for you as long as you turn to Him. You know how hopeful that is for the sinner that's constantly falling into the same mistake each and every time? They will lose sight that Allah is Ghafur, and they will think that Allah is only Ghafir. He'll only forgive you this one time. So Ghafur, Allah is always forgiving. Rahim is my favorite part of this whole conclusion, right? And that is, Rahim is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does two things. He will give you a mercy in return that is exceptional to you, that you thought you would never have or deserve. You didn't ask for mercy, but Allah will give it to you because Allah always sees you turning to Him for forgiveness. So because you constantly have that connection of forgiveness with Him, now you get a bonus, and the bonus is you have Allah's mercy. Everybody understand what mercy is, right? When we say mercy, think of it as tolerance. Allah will tolerate you no matter how much you mess up. Allah will keep on listening to you as long as you turn to Him sincerely. Because it's easy for us to get fed up with each other when somebody makes a mistake over and over. We can just say, you know what, forget you. You're not taking this serious. But for Allah, it's like, listen, not only am I happy you keep coming back to me, but in addition to that, because you're so disciplined, I'm going to give you a bonus, something you didn't even ask for, and that's mercy. There's a second opinion about Ghafur and Rahim, why they're coined together. Ghafur, you're forgiven with all of your sins. But just because you have Allah's forgiveness does not mean you're going to Jannah. Everybody understand? When Allah forgives you, doesn't mean Jannah is there. That has to be also ordered by Allah. and that's Rahim. So in other words, Allah is saying, I'm going to forgive you always, and don't worry. You get a bonus, and I will have Jannah waiting for you. Which I think is just remarkable. Very hopeful for all of us and for people that fall into sin constantly. Nothing else I want to enter. Are Arabic names recommended? We know the answer to that. We did this, right? Are Arabic names okay? When it comes to when it comes from the heart is what matters. Otherwise, it's just lip service. So going back to this rumor about the Prophet ﷺ, when it comes to the heart, that's the thing that matters. Do munafiqun speak from their heart? Yeah. So that's why Allah says, oh, they're just talking. Because the only thing that matters to Allah is what the believers think and feel. It's the only thing that matters. They are already disbelievers. So everything that they say is also thrown out the window. So that's the same relationship we have with munafiqun as well. Like you can talk all you want. You're not part of this nation of people to begin with. So what you say is completely useless as well. I'll just start this and we'll pause inshallah for today. النبي أولى بالمؤمنين من أنفسهم. The Prophet has a stronger affinity to the believers than they do themselves. This part here is going to talk to us about something that we all know, and that is that we love our Prophet ﷺ more than ourselves, more than our children, more than our parents, more than anyone. I argue that relationship with the Prophet ﷺ, the average Muslim still struggles with and does not understand the implications of that kind of relationship where I put my children second, my mom and dad second, and a man that I've never met before, never heard his voice, never touched or shaken his hand, nothing. I have to love him more than these people that raised me, that love me, that I nurture. That's a real struggle. So we're going to talk about how to develop this love, inshallah ta'ala, next week. And then as of next week moving forward, we will be really sailing through this surah. Right? Like I said to you, there are only some verses that we pause and we'll spend some time on, but there are also other verses that we don't need to repeat ourselves. So you'll notice that the pace every week will continue to increase more and more. So just ensure that you continue to stay with us till the very end. And we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keeps us close to Him and keeps the love of the Prophet ﷺ in our hearts and in our lives always and forever. Allahumma ameen. Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.